Victor and Talma, thank you so much for that great conversation. Next is a follow-up conversation to the 2023 Concordia Europe Summit, which covered 3 pillars: energy security, cyber defense, and diplomacy. And this session today will address how cross-sector partnerships are critical to tackling the issues that Europe faces today. So please welcome to the stage for this conversation Sasha Vakulina. She's the business editor at Euronews, and the Honorable Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, third Vice President of the Government of Spain and Minister for the Ecological Transition.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for being here. Once again, Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, third Vice President of the Government, Minister for the Ecological Transition, Spain. It's great to have you here in New York for the annual summit. And as it was mentioned during the introduction, this is indeed the follow-up conversation from the Europe Summit. At the 2023 Concordia Europe Summit, we looked at the future of indeed effective partnerships amidst the region's changing geopolitical setting through these 3 pillars. We talked about energy security, cyber defense, and diplomacy. And the idea now is to bring some of those discussions from Madrid here now to New York. Among them, who will replace Russia as Europe's primary energy provider? How can we seize the moment to diversify energy into renewable supplies and accelerate the green transition? What are the strategies involved in safeguarding critical infrastructure and strengthening cybersecurity capacity in an increasingly interconnected world? And how have the transatlantic diplomatic relations evolved to their present-day effect on global politics? It's a lot for a 15-minute conversation, absolutely. But I would like to still touch upon some of those most important things. In the wake of the invasion of Ukraine and the shifting geopolitical landscape in Europe, how do you view the importance of transatlantic collaborations in advancing the green energy transition and ecological policies across the region? Let's start here and get to the details of that.
Thank you, Sasha. That's quite reassuring to take it piece by piece and not everything together. But I think that this is a very good way to kick off. I think that probably what we have been experiencing in Europe during the last year after the invasion of Ukraine has made everybody to experience to what extent we should be much more active in the energy transition field, and how important it is to build alliance in different geographies and with different players, but also to identify how to invest to accelerate this transformation. So the relationship between the 2 sides of the Atlantic become crucial. And sometimes the main question is not so much where we should be competing, but where we should be working together. I think that we all are aware that this transformation requires important investments in different innovations, technologies, provide the education and the training to the skills, to the people that could be working in this new understanding of energy with a much more healthier balance between globalization and local supply of different materials or different solutions. And I think it is very good to see the efforts that the United States are making to accelerate their own energy transition. So the main question mark, according to my understanding, is where we should be working together. We need so much to be done in such a short period of time that maybe it is interesting to see how many and how we can provide and form engineers, how we could be investing in the new challenges with new materials, how we should be ensuring that the digitalization of the energy infrastructures can be developed in a safe manner, how we can go beyond what we have already learned in solar or in wind, in offshore, in cables, and so many other things to manage energy systems in a how to say, safe and environmentally sound manner.
How do you value and how do you see the acceleration of some of these processes that happened ever since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Because some of this process might have been called rather sluggish, And yet, last year, we saw that the acceleration happened at a much faster pace, and the alliances and the cooperation between the countries and the continents as well. Do you see this acceleration and the progress of it happening?
I think that we are seeing the acceleration, and we are also identifying the bottlenecks and the difficulties. So it is normal that sometimes we experience the tensions, or we have the impression that we are not going to be able to cope with all of this. But this is not the case. In fact, when we see the figures, how the figures and the results, the outcomes, how coming from very different backgrounds in the different 27 member states, we managed to provide security of supply with a certain level of flexibility and cooperating and providing a unified response. We see that things and principles are much more important than what we thought we could achieve, only taking into consideration the difficulties. And we saw how we managed to diversify the suppliers, but also to intensify the investments in the new infrastructures and the new technologies. And at the same time, we went through complicated, and for any European, what I'm going to say is very understandable, a complicated decision-making process, so to provide the regulatory context to get things done, to provide a good basis for investors, but also to ensure that people, normal people, consumers, industrial consumers and households could experience that what we were doing in the energy field did make sense. This is not always easy. We know that if we have a solar rooftop, that can be fantastic for those neighbors living in that building. This can help to some industries. But in some other cases, it is not enough. In some other cases, we need to go to the electricity market, or we need to ensure that we have access to natural gas. For the time being, it is the solution if we bet on hydrogen. So prices do count, but the regulatory context does help.
That help. In your role as the Minister for the Ecological Transition in Spain, how do you envision the energy landscape and how it is evolving in Europe? It's something that you've just touched upon. Can Europe seize this moment to bolster energy security whilst accelerating the green transition? And how is Spain contributing to that? Also, given the fact that we are indeed in the middle of Spain's presidency in the European Council.
It's true. We're in the middle of the European presidency, and I think that it is quite amazing and sometimes stressing, let's say it this way. Yes, I think that things have been accelerating. For instance, we see in the case of Spain, we have multiplied by 3 the installed capacity in solar photovoltaics in less than 5 years. There has been an increase of 30% of the increase of the capacity installed in wind, onshore wind. There is a great appetite on the new grids, investments in the digitalization of the grids or offshore wind. And this happens a little bit everywhere. This means that everybody is asking for the same goods and equipments, for the same supply chains worldwide, so creating additional tensions. And this brings us back to the question how we could build a certain level of strategic autonomy to ensure that these equipments, these goods can be provided at the local scale. Of course, we are interdependent and we need global markets, but it may be interesting to have something a little bit more balanced to avoid big lines of ships in Suez Channel, trying to reach Europe, for instance, how we can ensure that we can count on the skills, as I was saying. So these are the discussions that we are having right now, which are similar to the discussions that took place last year in the United States when talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and how this could be the entry point for a real revolution in energy, but also in industry, in infrastructures, and the modernization of the American economy. So I think that there are many similarities, and this is where we need to identify how we can do a little bit better acting together, and how we can do it a little bit better identifying where we have the add value in each of our member states, and how we can combine the different backgrounds of each member state to provide a good, consistent and coherent result.
When it comes to these stages and the levels from member states to the European level to the EU level, what role do you believe public-private partnership is playing and should play in this transition and in this process?
Well, I think that it is playing a very important role, and it will be increasingly important, even more than right now. I think that first thing, making real this, we could even call it revolution, needs the involvement of the local communities. Of course, city councils, but also local communities of users, trying to get different solutions. And it is not anymore an issue for a very few very big corporates, but big corporates, mid-sized corporates, small corporates, and associations of citizens willing to do things together. So creating this space, ensuring that everything can be accommodated is not very, very easy, but it is challenging. But I think that there's something which is very important. Everybody feeling that is part of this project building a better future, which is key. The second thing is that in these partnerships between public and private corporates identifying where the timeframes maybe do not match or where they can accelerate or what type of a context facilitates things to be real in a shorter term is very important. Because at the end it is not only a question of utilities producing, generating electricity. It is what about the steel and the different materials to build the equipments. It is what type of technologies do provide the management, the operation of the transport of this electricity, how it impacts in the industry itself that produces whatever. So I think that this conversation is very important. And this conversation is part of what it has been decided in this new framework of the Commission to be ensured for the time to be, with a Vice President of the Commission ensuring that we can build partnerships. We did it with batteries, we did it with the provision of green hydrogen or green steel. It is still on its way, but we still need to do much. And as I said, this is part of the partnerships that we need to build with corporates, but there is something we cannot miss: the conversation with citizens. Citizens experiencing good consequences because of this transformation and asking for more. If there is not a social support, a social demand of doing more and quicker, it could be much more difficult.
Yeah, I believe there is, because when it comes to Spain, when it comes to most of the EU members, when you look at the list of the concerns of the citizens, that's one of the top 3 over the past few years without any change. This is one of the top concerns for the citizens, right? We're in the critical months in the run-up to the next COP meeting, where the countries will take stock of the progress achieved since the signing of the Paris Agreement. Let's talk a little bit about that. Where are we on that way and on that development?
Well, I think that we don't need to be a Nobel Prize to know that we are not aligned with the Paris expectations. And I think that once said that, the main question mark is then what? And according to our understanding, then what means doing more and ensuring that we count on the right signals to do it quicker, which is very important. I mean, we have seen horrible wildfires in Hawaii, in Canada, in Europe, terrible floods in Greece, in Libya. Nobody can cope with this alone. We need to work together on that, and working together on that could mean early warning systems, investments in building adaptation and resilience among the societies, taking into consideration the impact in the different economic sectors, such as the tourist sector or the changes in the demand of electricity coming back to energy. But we also need to reason this in terms of how we can avoid this going increasingly dangerous. So we need to reduce emissions in a very dramatic manner in a very short period of time. This is why we need to combine pieces. Sometimes there are countries that say, yes, but we should be doing on our own. If we do it each one on our own, things maybe do not match. So it's good to count on this umbrella of the United Nations system that provides a common ground to understand how things are going, how we can do faster in certain fields, or why we need to accelerate in other fields or learn from each other on the basis of equity, but also on the basis of an effective performance. What we could be seeing in Dubai, I hope that we see ambition in terms of how we can accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels. Of course, we cannot phase out fossil fuels from one day to the next one, but we need to ensure the conditions to be in a position to do so. So we need to provide alternatives for people, otherwise it won't be possible. We need to ensure a much more wider understanding on how we can change the water policies, the food policies, to be sure that we are resilient. It's not just a small project that is adapted to the climate impacts, it's that we need to think in a different manner, and how we can ensure something which was also said in the preambular language of the Paris Agreement, that all the financial flows are consistent with the climate needs. Otherwise, we may have in lots of dollars, millions of euros, but it's just a very small piece being invested in a wise manner against a huge share being invested in the wrong way. So I think that these are the type of conversations that we will be having, knowing that Emirates is a very particular country because it's an oil and gas producer country that has also tried to learn from the renewable energy revolution, what role they could be playing, orienting their investments in different fields. So I think that they should be audacious, they should be brave enough, they can be brave enough to facilitate a different approach.
We have run out of time, but I want to ask you the final question, 20 seconds, because the team are expecting. It's 3 days of the Concordia summit here in New York, but I'm trying to bring the Madrid conversation here as well. And there are lots of talks here during the 3 days about the upcoming elections in the United States. Now, I want to ask you about the upcoming elections for the European Union. We're less than a year away. Do you see anything changing in terms of the negative and sluggish change when it comes to the green transition? Because, of course, this was one of the most important agendas for the Ursula von der Leyen Commission in her recent State of the Union as well, green and digital. Do you see this space continuing with the next election in the European Union?
Well, I think that this is why it is important to understand that this needs to be socially backed. And this means that we need to pay attention to people. It's not just that the big figures in economic terms do much. It's that there are many people who experience such a big change in such a short period of time that it may create fear. What does this mean for me, for my day-to-day life? What type of alternatives may be available for me and my family? And I think that this is something to be taken very seriously. Otherwise, this fear is very easily converted into a threat against the transformation. In fact, the fear should be the fear of doing nothing, of being impacted and not having the tools to create prosperity. But I guess that this is something where we need to invest much more. And I'm optimistic on this European approach and European willingness to keep on building prosperity. But yes, we need to pay attention, both in the United States, in the European Union, and I would say in many other places in the world.
That was always a European take there. Thank you so much. Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, Third Vice President of the Government, Minister for the Ecological Transition, Spain. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Much for that conversation. Now we want to get to some polling before we get to our final panel today with Jose Andres from the World Central Kitchen. We are going to do these 4 polls that pertain obviously to the conversations that we've had in this room throughout the day. And I do want to invite you, if you don't already know, to go to pigeonhole.at so that you can get that access to that poll on your smartphone or your tablet. So starting with the first poll question, now is what do you believe is the most critical aspect of addressing the challenge of feeding a growing global population while mitigating the effects of climate change? Do you think it's ensuring food security and nutrition for future generations, maintaining soil health and biodiversity for more resilient farms? Is it reducing the environmental footprint of agriculture, or practicing indigenous people's farming techniques and use of land in America? We'd love to have you take part in this poll. And it looks like the first question, ensuring food security and nutrition for future generations, or not first question, but first answer to that poll, is getting the most response here. Our second poll is the question is a cohesive energy approach. We heard talk about energy a little bit earlier. A cohesive energy approach across the regions of Canada, the United States, and Mexico will be the answer to the energy security challenge of an ever-rising demand and, at the same time, an urgent need to reduce global emissions. Do you strongly agree with that comment? Do you agree? Are you neutral about it? Do you disagree, or do you strongly disagree that a cohesive energy approach across the regions of Canada, the US, and Mexico will be the answer to energy security challenge of an ever-rising demand and, at the same time, an urgent need to reduce global emissions? We love to get your input on these so we can continue the conversation. And it looks like we have a tie between agreeing and neutral, and these are all live responses so that you can see how this is playing out in real time. So most of you agree to that with that comment. We have two more polling questions we'd like to show. The first is decarbonization and diversifying energy supplies toward renewables is the main solution to strengthen Europe's energy security post in the invasion of Ukraine. Do you strongly agree with that? Do you agree? Are you neutral on that? Do you disagree, or do you strongly disagree? And it looks like we have most people agreeing with that comment at this moment. And our final poll question of the day, in your opinion, what is the most critical factor contributing to hunger and food insecurity among refugees and disaster-affected communities? What is the most critical factor here? Is it lack of access to food aid? Is it insufficient humanitarian aid funding? Is it conflict and displacement, or climate-related disasters, or something else? And responding to that question, it appears insufficient humanitarian aid funding is what is getting the biggest response here. So we have one more panel today, including Jose Andres. He will be one of our speakers, and also Dr. Rajiv Shah, president of the Rockefeller Foundation and former USAID administrator. We are going to wait for Jose Andres. He will be here momentarily, and so we'll continue that conversation right when we get back. It'll probably be about 3 to 5 minutes. So stand by, and we'll be back with more right after this.